Hey, what's up, YouTube? How you doing? What's up, Spotify? What's up, everybody listening wherever you are in your cars or whatever's going on? It's we're back with another thing. It's the thing again. If you're listening to the audio version, then you already know. We've already been talking for a while, and we're just here with the guests now. But YouTube, what's up? How's everybody doing? Welcome back. I'm here with my sister, Lisa. This is fantastic. She came in on short notice, and like 5 minutes ago, I was like, she was like, wait, is this a video thing? And I was like, yeah. And then she went and got camera ready in like 2 minutes, did this wardrobe change. You look fantastic. I was like, I'm wearing a sleeveless sweatshirt, so it's very cash.
I thought this was going to be all audio. I had no idea. So, doing my
No,
best here.
you look great. You look fantastic. How you feeling?
I'm feeling good. I apologize. I'm a little congested with fires and allergy season. So, hopefully, you guys can hear me okay.
Yeah, I think you sound good. And if you need to sniffle at all, that's okay.
That might happen. It might happen.
I'm really glad that we got you in here. There's sort of been a nice trajectory on the last 3 episodes. I talked to my friend Whit about forgiveness, and there was sort of this storyline in that episode where I was like, I have a hard time forgiving myself, Whit. And I told him like I let other people off the hook really, really easily. But I have a really hard time forgiving myself. And he was like, well, why don't you just do it? Do it right here on the podcast. And I was like, I don't know if I can. I was like, I would like to. I would really like to, but I don't know if I can. And I didn't on that episode. I was like, yeah, I'm hanging on to that. But it was part of this narrative that's been coming up in my life of like, I really hang on to stuff when it comes to holding myself accountable. And I have a really hard time letting myself off the hook. And I have a really hard time like giving myself a break. And I hang on to shame, like shame from deep down in my life. And that was right before I came out to Utah and hung out with you and Adam, and you invited me to come do a cord cutting ceremony. And then like after that, the next podcast episode was me talking to a guy who was a person who spent 25 years of his life in prison for committing first-degree murder when he was 19, and is now out of prison and is a life coach who teaches people about shame and about getting rid of their shame and parting with their shame. So it's been a nice little trajectory. And I talked briefly in that episode with him about cord cutting. I was like, do you know about this? And he was like, no, I've never heard about it. I was like, oh, it's like this crazy psychedelic thing that happened to me. It's so like intensely powerful. I didn't know what I was getting into. But yeah, we were hanging out and you just made this offer. You were like, do you want to come over and do a cord cutting ceremony? I had no idea what you were talking about. And I said, yes, because this whole year's been about like digging into whatever I can dig into to try to get to the root of like what's going on with my anxiety, with my fear, with my discomfort. And then, trying to heal from narratives that aren't serving me and forgive myself and move forward in love. What is, for the people listening or watching on YouTube, Lisa, what is a cord cutting ceremony?
It's a great question, and you'll probably get a lot of different answers depending on who you ask. So just keep in mind, this is what I perceive cord cutting as. And, I am a practicing witch, so it is very common in witch culture to practice cord cutting. You don't actually even have to have a ceremony. You can do it with meditation. You can do it just even in your mind's eye, if you will. But I should probably move this so I don't keep hitting it. What a cord cutting ceremony, in my opinion, is it is an opportunity for someone to cognitively decide to disconnect from either a person, a narrative, a belief structure, or even like a habit that's not serving them anymore. And, energetic cords are very real things. We don't really realize that we have them. It's something that we naturally develop with other people, even with ourselves, around ideas around ourselves. It's just something that attaches us to other people. Well, other people. Let's just go with other people. That's an easier thing to correlate. So energetic cords can be weak. They can be messy. They can be ugly. They can be super strong. But at the end of the day, if we're really trying to move past something, especially something like trauma, a bad relationship, or even like transitioning. So, for instance, mothers and daughters need to transition from the mother-daughter dynamic to, when they're older. Cord cutting is really useful for that. Cord cutting is a cognitive awareness that something needs to shift and change, and I facilitate a visual representation of that cord cutting.
Okay. That's a great definition. And I mean, yeah, like it's it's so interesting because I think what a big part of what I've been realizing since doing the ceremony and also through this year is like the core of my fears, and I think the core of most people fears, is it comes down to like a fear of death, which is a fear of change. But it all funnels down to this ultimate shift that none of us fully understands, this transformation that occurs at death. And everything that changes is like this reminder of this thing that's coming. Is like I don't like the way my relationship functions with my parent, as you said, to change. I don't like the way that my relationship functions with myself to change. And even though it's constantly changing, whether we like it or not, but we energetically hold on to these things, and it creates these very strong energetic cords that can really keep us stuck and keep us bound. And that's the idea, right?
It is. Well,
Yeah.
and again, like, if you want to change your life, you can't if you aren't aware of the issue and taking accountability for it,
Mhm.
right? Like, I mean, if you aren't cognitive of what the problem is and your portion of contributing to the problem, how can you ever change anything? So, approaching something like this is simply a belief that you can change. And
Yeah.
then it's putting action into that and actually doing something about it. Now, granted, this is also can be a very spiritual experience. This is not just a representation. It's not just playing with your mind. Like, you are playing with energy and you are playing with higher source. At least in my opinion, you are. You're connecting to your higher self. You're connecting to the part of you that wants you to be whole, that wants you to move away from narratives that keep you small. And that's part of the reason I absolutely love doing cord cuttings. Is I love watching people take their power back into their own hands. And that's what generally cord cutting is.
Yeah, you said to me that like you don't really do anything. It's them that really does it. It's the person that's in the room that does it. You're just there to facilitate and hold the space and like create the environment and sort of like nudge and guide. But really, it's like it's one of those things that you really get out of it what you put into it. That
Yes.
if you come in, if someone comes in and sits down with you and is like, "Well, show me what you got, magic lady," like bring in some spirits and rock my world. It's like, well, it's not like they have to bring it. They have to
Yes.
bring the intention of what it is that they
Yes.
want to cut ties with.
Oh yeah. I mean, I love this line of work because I get to just show up as myself authentically, which I'm I'm a nice person, but I'm not anything extraordinary. But just being myself in that space allows for them to move forward and learn how to heal themselves. So my philosophy in any of the ceremonies that I do is that you are your own healer. You do not need me to tell you how to do this. I am just going to hold space for you to do this safely. And sometimes things will come through me for you. And whether or not you want to hear it is completely up to you. So people have autonomy of choice in these ceremonies. And I mean, sometimes they're super spiritual and sometimes they're super witchy and sometimes they're just very like emotional and they're whatever this person needs them to be.
Yeah, you mentioned that earlier about like witchcraft, that you're a practicing witch and that this can be very witchy. Do you happen to know like what the specific origins of doing something like this are? Is it rooted in like witchcraft, or I mean, does it? Do you know like where the idea of this began? Is it something that humans have always been doing, or in some I mean in some fashion or other? I assume it is. People have always been finding ways to cut ties with narratives or people or situations that aren't serving them, but like being intentional about it in this ceremonious way, like what are the roots of that?
Well, I mean, I think this goes back so far. It's probably like origins are probably not traceable.
Mm.
But from what have researched and what I know about it is that this is deeply rooted in paganism, which paganism is the foundation of witchcraft. pagans some pagans believe in deities, some don't, like myself. But really all pagans celebrate and honor Mother Earth. So most people like myself work with herbs. We believe in, working with Mother Earth to heal. So,
Mm.
so in paganism, it's one of the most ancient religions, if you will, even though it's not a religion. It's more of a way of life. The cord and the knot is actually a huge part of their culture. So if you look into like Celtic paganism, for instance, you will see the Holy Trinity, the three triangles that
Hmm.
makes that knot. That's
Yeah.
also Christians use it as the Holy Trinity. That is actually a design that creates the sacred geometry. I don't know if anyone knows what that is, but it all correlates. And so these concepts come from, I mean, before we probably even have like written literature about it. I know that witches were known to send sailors off with ropes with knots in them, and they would tie spells into it.
Oh,
Yeah, which I thought was really cute.
I
So
love that.
it would like calm the storms. They would untie the knots, and it would help calm the storms. Hand fasting in paganism is huge. It's still practiced to this day. So people often weren't able to like access a minister when they wanted to get married. So they would hand fast with their partner, which was basically like an engagement, but they were allowed to be married from that point on, I believe. But it was considered like kind of like a pre-marriage marriage. So, energetic cords, hand fasting, knots, all of this goes way back. And it's in Nordic culture, it's in Celtic culture. I'm pretty sure even Egyptian culture has some form of cord cutting philosophy. Whether or not it was a ceremony, I don't know. I mean, I think this may be like the modern day witch may have made her own thing of this, I don't
Sure,
know.
it's probably been done many different ways. You even said at the beginning that you're like, it doesn't have to be done ceremoniously. It can be done in
No.
meditation. It's obviously one of those things that it's like it's about the intention that the person who is doing the cutting is bringing to it. And I think a ceremony is almost just like providing an environment where a person can be singularly focused on that intention, and you as the facilitator creating an environment where they can really like, because I personally believe that we all always have access to these spiritual planes when
Yes.
if we really want to dig in, but it does take effort to try to center oneself and bring oneself into a present state. And I think like just providing a framework for that is very useful and powerful and helpful.
I agree. I grew up in the Christian religion, and I have deep love and affection for all faith bases. I think this is not ever meant to be like a bash on religion thing. It just didn't work for me having that type of classification of faith. But, I believe that in some faith bases, we have a tendency to be taught to like mute our gifts, if
Mm.
you will. I remember being taught that to be able to speak to people who've passed or people who like honored moon cycling or the sun were considered demonic. So I spent
Oh,
half my life believing that my natural gifts, which I have some very big and beautiful natural gifts, were demonic, and so I suppressed them. I didn't use them. And yeah, so people can access this, whether or not they have been able to fine tune that part of their cognitive awareness or their brain. That's another thing, and it's hard. It takes a lot of work.
yeah, there's almost like an abdication of the power in theism. I was reading in a book the other day of like theism versus non-theism, and how theism is all about this externalized view of there's this external savior, there's this thing outside of you that if you are good enough and behave good enough, this thing will come and save you. And non-theism, functioning in the very same way, is not is sort of abandoning hope of like this external force or power to come and save you, and understanding that that thing resides inside of you and that it's internal. And but they're both two sides of the same coin. One is just seeking for help or redemption or that the magic from outside, some external thing that comes in and lifts you up, and the other is realizing that it comes from within. But I think that like I think this is like weirdly what's happening with Christian people who like speak in tongues or get healed on stage. You know, they walk up and the preacher shocks them with the power of God. Is when you are energetically open to it, when you are open and willing and you're in that setting and you are open to the idea that like this man is going to shock the power of God into me, without knowing it, you are digging into your own internal power for that moment. Whether there's a part of you that's going like, I'm kind of putting this on, I don't know, but I'm sure people have walked away from experiences like that going, I don't know what the hell just happened. I walked up on that stage and that guy touched me and it was like electricity rocked through my body. And I don't really necessarily deny that they had that experience. I just don't think personally that it is the way that setting frames it, which is like this man who has the authority to pass this external power through you is passing it through you. Instead, it's like a collective of people tapping into each of their individual internal power cells, but the narrative around that setting gives the power away to some external force rather than acknowledging that like, no, we're all coming together right now and doing a really powerful thing as a collective.
Uh-huh.
Does
Oh,
that,
I
you know?
agree. Oh, I agree. I
Yeah.
actually, it's funny you say that because I think one of the things I thought was really silly in Christianity was speaking in tongues. And
Mm-hmm.
then post religion, I've had extremely prophetic moments where I've spoken in several languages, ancient languages. And, of course, people could be like, well, how do you know what that is?
Right.
At the end of the day, I don't. But I do know that I don't know what I was saying and what was coming through me. And I don't believe in possession. So I wasn't possessed by something. But, I believe that we've lived many lives, and whether or not we can tap into those lives, I mean, I don't see why not. Like, I don't believe time is linear. So, like,
Right. There's that whole thing, and I
I
think
know that's
that
a big one.
but it's like it comes from this space of like, how open to this can you be? Because you get out of it what you put into it. And I think that those people who are speaking in tongues or whatever, like it's really easy to look at that and go like, that's silly. But it's like, well, something's happening there.
Yeah.
So whether it's people collectively putting an act on for each other because everyone's afraid to be the one person who goes like, I'm not feeling it, you guys. Whatever it is, like something is taking place. Something psychospiritually is taking place. I personally believe that there is some element to it's like, I would go to church growing up and I would feel the spirit. I'd be at church and I would feel that, and that would be for so many people, that's the confirmation to them that
Mm-hmm.
God is real, that their church is real, is this feeling of like, ooh, I'm getting a warm fuzzy that
Oh,
I don't
yeah.
know that's coming in. And it's like, that's not necessarily wrong. I don't think looking back, like, oh, I was just tricking myself. It's like, no, that was happening,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't know what to call it. And I was being taught to call it like, that's the spirit of God telling you that this room is the one room that has the access to this power. And that's sort of my beef with religion, is this sort of monopolizing of the
Yes.
power when it's like, no, you
Yeah.
can get that power in so many different ways. And when it comes to speaking in tongues, you also mentioned earlier sacred geometry, where it's like people talk about this when they do DMT, when they do uh, even ayahuasca, even sometimes acid or psilocybin. This idea of like seeing sacred geometry. It's almost like the framework of how the universe is structured or built, and you go to this realm where it's all built out of the sacred geometry, and there's like these beings that communicate almost telepathically, and so many people relay the same experience of seeing the same thing, and it's hard to convey in whatever language, in any modern tongue, to from one person to the next exactly what it is that you saw or heard. But it's almost like you just had to be there and to know like
Yes.
it happened. I'm not
Yes.
making it up. uh
Well, if it's real for you, then that's the only thing that it can be real for. Like, we are all living in like momentarily. That's the only thing that's real to each and every one of us. And like, my perception of real and your perception of real is going to be different. Am I real when I'm not in your view? Like, if I'm not in your viewpoint, do I still exist? right? Like, to me, I do, because I'm having a singular life experience. And this, I mean, I could go on for hours about this, but like, yes.
Yeah.
I'm with you on that. It's a personal experience. I personally left religion because of this philosophy that there is one and only one way for things to work. I think people like to have a checklist of information that makes them feel safe. It's a narrative that makes them feel safe, especially around death, like you brought up earlier. I lost my dad 3 years ago, and I 100% understand why the religious narrative is such a wonderful thing for people who are in extreme loss.
Yeah.
When this energy just disappears, which again, energy can't be created or destroyed, right? It can only be
Mm-hmm.
transferred. So where did this person's energy go? It is so much safer and easier to believe that somebody up above knows everything and that he's promising this beautiful ending for us, versus taking your own accountability and your own personal power and accepting that post death we may not have an answer for. I mean, it could just be blank.
I don't think we're supposed to. I don't think that we in this form are supposed to have a clear-cut answer for it.
No, it's too much
I've
for our brains.
I've personally run the gamut of thinking that it 100% is a blank slate, that death is death and that's it. And when you're dead, the lights go out and it's nothing. And nothing is this weird thing that we can't even conceive of, because even though, as far as we can tell, we experience nothingness for all of the history of the universe up until we were born, it's still hard. We can't really conceive of what that is. That was my belief for a very long time. I am no longer of that belief. I now believe death is a doorway and that it's a matter of transformation. Like so many things are, that just the nature of existence is to be constantly in flux and constantly in motion and constantly changing. And that's what really scares us about death. It's not the nothingness, it's the mystery of what does the transformation entail. And that's the part where I'm like, we're not really supposed to know or understand it. You can't know it until you get to it. It's sort of like going through checkpoints of mental health in your wake, in this existence, of like, there's certain things that you can't understand until you get there. And like, you don't understand what it will feel like on your wedding day until you're there. You don't you just like, you don't actually know it until you're there. And that's so trying to understand that experience before you have it is futile and impossible. But I definitely have come around to the persuasion, weirdly enough, that I don't believe it is an ending point.
I mean, you could blast your brain with DMT and give it a go.
Yeah, yeah,
Apparently that's like doorway to death, but I don't.
yeah, yeah. Get a little peek. Get a little sneak peek.
I don't have personal experience with that, so I can't tell you, but I've heard
Yeah.
really interesting things about it.
So, how did you get into becoming a facilitator for cord cutting for people? Did you read about it on the internet while you were looking up witchy spells or something, or
How
did
did
a
I get
friend tell you about it? Like, how did this come about?
Okay, I think, because I was trying to think about that. First of all, I had no intention of being a facilitator of cord cutting. That was like never even in my viewpoint. I was. Oh, you know what? It was TikTok.
Oh, really?
I saw a video on. I love TikTok. It's like
Found
my
it on
favorite,
TikTok.
like 20 minutes before bed that I get to have, where I just get to watch stuff. So
Yeah.
I was watching Witch Talk, which is just a really fantastic, little diversion of TikTok.
Yeah.
And I saw a cord cutting ceremony, and I was like, what is that? So I went and watched a few videos on it, and I started researching it, and I was like, this sounds exceptionally useful. Like, yeah, let's do this. And um, I selfishly had really good reasons for doing this, because my husband and I were dealing with just some really uncomfortable situations revolving his ex-wife. And so I realized when I learned about energetic cords that he's never cut his one of his many cords, because we
Yeah.
all have many cords, but he had never really completely cut his marital cord with her. So he was really emotionally invested in in her well-being, which I don't think is a bad thing to have, but it's hard when it's a tumultuous relationship to carry that for somebody, especially when it's not reciprocated. So I did it for him, because I was like, I think you need to like cut this cord. And it was such a profound experience right off the get-go.
Was that your
Um,
first one?
I think it was. I'm trying to remember because it's been a while, but I think it was.
I think it's special that it started as an act of service, that it started as something that you were like, I want to do
Yeah.
this as a gift for my partner. And that's sort of how you've carried it. Yeah.
Well, believe it or not, I actually haven't done my own cord cutting until about 2 months ago. So
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that's kinda sad because I don't actually believe in I believe I should always do something that I do for other people. I should try it.
Yeah.
But I just hadn't thought about doing it for myself. I didn't really think I had any cords that needed cutting. Um,
you're
which I
you're
was like,
gonna go help
wrong,
everybody else cut their cords, but you're
wrong.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's called doing our own work. This is
Yeah.
shadow work right here. So, yeah, I'm pretty sure I started with him. And so I what I found really interesting in that first ceremony is I actually saw a visual representation of their relationship in the candles. So cord cuttings are done on a plate, a hot plate, ideally. I've had them break on me. So now I have a cast iron plate.
Hmm.
And you melt two candles onto the plate and you tie them with a twine. And then I put salt on the bottom of them and then I put herbs on them for each person, depending on what they need. So you set it down and then the person. Do you want me to explain how it works now or do you want me
Please.
to? Okay. So,
Let's get into it. 11
so
herbs and spices, KFC
herbs
style.
and herbs and spices. I'm like, okay, I'm feeling some jasmine flower.
Yeah.
I always put elderflower on it. It's a really beautiful herb used for safety and security and spiritual transformation. So I always have all my go-tos, and then I add bits and pieces depending on what I'm feeling for each person. And then what the person does is they sit in front of the altar. I call it the altar of the cord cutting,
Hmm.
and at this point, we've been talking about what it is they're cutting from for a while. And because I have them talking while I'm creating the altar. And I ask them to tell me the good, the bad, the hard, the beautiful. I want them to go through the full gamut of the relationship while we're preparing for this cord cutting. And then I put the altar in front of them and I have them ceremoniously light each candle, and in each candle I have them put an intention. Now if it's a person they're cutting from, they're going to etch the name of the person they're cutting from on one and then their name on another. And that's a very common cord cutting. It's usually with people, but usually it's okay. I say it's usually with people, but really like it's also with a narrative. It's something in themselves that
Hmm.
is connected to why this relationship is troubled or struggling or why they need to remove themselves from it. So
Yeah.
it always ends up becoming more than that, right? It's always more than just a person. And they speak their intention verbally.
Hmm.
Mind you, I've created a container of safety around people. And what that means is I cast a circle around us of safety so that no energies are allowed in that could potentially be harmful or that could be even just like want to play a little bit and test the waters around us because we're really like ramping things up, and energies are drawn to that. Like it's like a beacon of light. It's like the moths are flying around the light. So I created a container. The person puts intention in the cords and then they light the candles and we watch the candles burn. Every single time some type of visual representation of whatever they're cutting from occurs in the candles. So, and it doesn't
I
happen
heard
the
this.
same.
Somebody asked me, I was telling someone I did this and they were like, what happened with the candles? They're like, did you see something? And I was like, oh, I didn't know I was supposed to be looking for that. But there is some sort, I don't know if you saw it when I did it. I was so immersed in like the
Yeah.
world of what was taking place energetically. I think I missed the visual representation that might have been taking place on the candles.
You didn't have to. Like
Yeah.
this each person's ceremony is going to happen the way they need it to. And
Yeah.
I have learned to quiet my ego when it's happening, worrying that I'm not doing it correctly or that it's not burning correctly, or is it going to burn the way that it's going to, like that's something I've had to work through for myself in sitting in facilitation for this, is to not place any judgment on what's happening. What happens is meant to happen. So I don't know if you remember, but I ended up getting you a third candle. I
Yes,
don't know if you
yes.
remember that.
I do
So
remember that.
that's because, well, we did a lot of work in yours. We did, I
Yeah.
mean, by far, your journey has been the biggest one I've ever done. It was just, I mean, it was
I
so
win.
beautiful. It was
I
so,
win cord cutting.
I feel like I wish we could have recorded it because it was so profound and beautiful, and so much was moved in that ceremony. Like, and I felt that third chord come up because as you're speaking, doorways pop up for me. This is how facilitation works for me across the board. When I am sitting with somebody energetically and they're speaking to me, something may come out of their mouth that will open a doorway for me, or pop a little doorway will pop up, and I'll be like, "Ooh, there's something in that doorway. You want to go in there and look at that doorway?" And actually, the day before when we were at dinner and you had said something, that's why I asked you to do a cord cutting. I saw a doorway open up. And I was
Mm.
like, "Ooh, there's a narrative there."
It's so,
Ooh.
you talk about the ego, and my ego was the thing I had to combat the hardest while I was doing this with you,
Mhm.
because I have 11 years of an atheist skeptic in my head still, who any kind of everything you're saying about casting a circle to keep the energy safe and everything like that, there is a person in me, and I can hear, I'm sure there are listeners listening to the podcast who they can't help but roll their eyes and go, "Oh, give me a fucking break."
Oh, for
You're like,
sure.
"Oh, okay,"
Yeah.
and it's like, but that sort of resistance that comes from my ego.
Mhm.
That comes from that is the part of me that resists change, that will find any, and if I can just tell myself like, this is stupid, what don't I, because I definitely felt there were times when we were doing it that I felt silly, that I was like, I'm talking out loud to people who are not in the room, and but I was like, well, Lisa and Adam aren't going to judge me because they're the ones who invited me to this, so it'd be rude of them to judge me for
Yeah.
for talking out loud to myself. But also it's like when you feel yourself doing that, I just want to say to any listeners who might have that same voice in their head that I have, it's like, when you feel yourself doing that, just try to think like, yeah, but what happens if you just give into something like this, rather than going like, oh, come on, give me a break? Like, what happens if you just like go, or I don't know, lean into it? What
Yeah.
happens if you're open instead of like, can you at least be willing to just accept the possibility that
Mhm.
we might not be completely full of shit, and that like the experience that I had, which was one of the most profound experiences of my life, was real? You know what I mean? It's like that ego thing because you talking about seeing doors opening and stuff like that and nudging people, and I'm like, yeah, like in order for it to work for me, it was like I had to move through all of that ego, all of that resistance, every time the voice in my head went, dude, what are you doing? What are we doing here? I had to go, shush, shush, shush. This is actually really special, and please just come along,
But that's a
and
good way of dealing with it. I'm proud of you that you did that, because those protector parts, like, they're in all of us. I mean, saying the word witch out loud still makes me anxious inside. Like,
mm-hmm,
I make myself say it for a reason, because there's such a negative connotation with the word, but people are not even remotely educated on what it actually means. Like, what true witchcraft means, right? So
people
when
still
you
have an idea that like you should be burned at the
I,
stake.
absolutely. It's actually, there's people on TikTok talking about it, like, which is hilarious because most Christian women,
Oh,
prayer is casting a spell. You are
oh yeah,
casting a spell by using your words,
yep.
and or herbs. People are all into doTERRA. They love their oils. Like,
Blessing the
ladies,
house, blessing the family.
come join the
Yeah.
party. It's really good
Mm-hmm.
over here. So
Yep.
like, and
Blessing
that's,
the food. Yeah,
yes,
like, you
this
are
is all
doing, yes,
witchcraft,
you're
guys.
doing spells. Yes.
It's not, it's yes. So narratives are uncomfortable, and and our ego wants us to pull away from it because it is potential for hurt. It's
Mm-hmm.
potential for, especially like for instance with you and your religious background, for feeling like you've been duped,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's there to keep us safe, but it's okay to say, hey, like, I'm okay, there's no bear chasing me right now, I'm totally safe, and it's okay to lean into this. I am not telling you that what is happening is 100% factual truth. I don't think anything in life is factual truth, and I think if we all abided by that theory, we would probably be a lot nicer to one another.
Yeah.
So if you can just walk into things and go, you know what, I don't know, the only thing I know is I don't know anything. And that just
Yeah.
gets worse as I get older.
And I have an intention that like, I want something to work. I want to you know, like I was nervous walking in there. I was nervous walking into your house that day. I was like, I don't know what we're about to do. I don't know, we're about to poke around in places and I don't really know, but like I was like, I trust these people and I think I'll be okay. But you know, it is scary. It's scary because you're going like, well, but am I about to like get rid of who I've been for the last 30 plus years? Am I about to walk out of this room as a different person?
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm ready for that. Who is that person? You're telling me that in like an hour and a half, I'm gonna have a whole different like a paradigm shift. I don't know if I'm ready for that. Like people, even if where they are is uncomfortable, we are so afraid of change, so afraid of death, so afraid of the impermanence of things that we resist positive change, the possibility of positive change.
Oh yeah.
And that skeptic voice, that as you called it, maybe a more compassionate way to call it, that protector voice is just a way of avoiding the reality of change, because change is going to get you whether you accept it or not. This is a way I think you can be intentional about leaning into it.
Oh yeah.
um
Do you want to be a victim or do you want to be someone who's intentionally doing something? Because those are two different energies. Like, I would much rather be like, you know what, I'm cognitively like choosing to change my life versus I've been thrown a deck of cards that they're falling all over the place and I have no control over anything. And granted that happens, but how we choose to receive information is the only thing we can control. So yeah, I'm with you on that one. I think it's just those are very different energies, being a victim versus being intentional. And cord cutting is a very intentional thing. Like I make you what you're doing is you're literally like for instance with you, that resistance is you're mourning yourself.
mm,
You're mourning like I miss parts of myself 20 years ago. I wasn't a
yeah.
better person, but I miss parts of
Oh
myself.
yeah.
And I'd love to like bring some of that back into to now, but that's, you know, that's my journey, that's my work. And every single time I do a journey, Austin, every single time, I mourn the person that I am losing that day. Because I am losing somebody. I'm losing a part of myself and I'm moving into something else.
Well, and if
Which,
you're separating from a literal other person too, which
yeah.
some people do, when people, you
Oh,
know, it's like
yeah.
that. I had a bunch of old relationships that I was working through, and I was going, like, coming to the realization that like I don't just miss my most recent ex, I miss them all. I miss all of them, and
Yeah.
there's a part of me that wants to time travel back and be back together with each and every one of them and be back in our happiest moment and be back in some perfect moment 5, 10, 15 years ago where I was cuddling with this or that person, looking into their eyes, feeling love overwhelming. And what that process was like accepting that I'm probably always going to miss these people. I'm probably always going to love these people. And I'm probably always going to like cherish and long for like the times that were, but accepting that those relationships were exactly what they needed to be. They were exactly as long as they needed to be. They came into my life at the right time. They left at the right time, that we were the right thing for each other, that like I don't need to look at them as failures or as like, oh, I should have done this, that, or the other thing. It's like, no, it just happened the way it happened. Even the imperfection, even the fights, even
Mhm.
the disagreements, the rough parts. Like again it's that fear of death, that fear of impermanence. Like I miss these people, I mourn the loss of these people, but also like I get to hold them forever in love in my hearts and know that like it's just part of that ever changing cycle, that continuous transformation, that like the dynamic between me and them is just transformed into something else, you
Well, yeah,
know.
you let go of the cord that
Yeah.
was binding you a certain way. I mean, some people actually cut cords so that they can develop a better one.
Mm,
So it's cord cutting isn't always to remove someone from your life. And trust me, you can't force somebody out of your life.
yeah.
So, like, I have cut some very malicious cords before,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't want to be cut. And the energy attacks me. I've been attacked by two cord cutting
Oof.
ceremonies. I actually have like scars from them.
Oh my god.
Um, yeah, it was pretty wild. But um, it doesn't mean you get to remove that person from you, but what you get to do is you get to remove the energy around that person in regards to that specific dynamic of your relationship. So if you're cutting a cord with somebody who's abusive and who just is ill, has just nothing good for you, what you're cutting essentially is their ability to affect you. because you're shifting your perspective around them.
Mm.
So I can't make someone disappear. I don't know how to do banishing spells. I'm not that advanced as a witch. Apparently, you can do that. We'll see. But like to be able to say, I'm going to give you the power to choose your narrative around this relationship. You get to decide how to move forward with it, and you get to decide whether or not they have any influence in your life anymore.
Yeah.
Like, cool.
What do you do personally now that you've been doing this for a little bit and you've done, several of these with different people? What is your process for preparing to be the person who's going to hold the space and establish the space and facilitate the experience?
So I clean the space. I use sage and I use Palo Santo to clean and fill the space.
Mhm.
I will set up a container that's just an area that's just very comfortable for the person. I actually do have an intake form that I have people fill out now so that I can
Oh, that's
prepare.
great. Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm just found that like it's nice to have a little more information on my side of things so I can just be prepared for what type of ceremony this is going to be.
Mhm.
And I think it's a really good practice for somebody coming into one to fill it out because they have to look at these things, ask themselves these questions, and then it just brings that awareness, right? Because we're
Right.
manifesting something in a cord cutting. We're not just releasing, we're manifesting. And manifestation is literally the ability to be cognitive and aware of something to the point where we bring it to fruition.
Mhm.
So, I send them an intake form. I have them fill it out. I read through it. I ask every single person who's going to come into a ceremony, I say, I need you to start grieving this now. I need you to start the process of grief.
Whew.
So they come into it ready, already grieving whatever it is they're letting go of. And it's, like I said, I set up the area, and I honestly, like, my job's pretty easy because it's different every single time.
Mhm.
When I sat for you, it was I feel like that was probably one of my more like uh I don't like the word witchy, but it's not the right term. I mean, I was getting, speaking to the dead.
Yeah.
I saw you in multiple, if you're okay with me saying this, I saw you in multiple dimensions or multiple timelines. I spoke
Mhm.
with you in multiple timelines. I saw you from a little boy all the way to, now.
Yeah.
And, that was pretty wild. So it's not
Yeah, it
always like
was
that for me.
yeah, it was wild.
That was wild. And then the next night, the one I did, I felt I couldn't connect to any of those things for this person. And I
Mm.
almost felt like bad because I was like, why isn't it working? But
Did you
it
feel
wasn't what he
drained?
needed. No, it just wasn't what he needed. He needed
Uh,
something complete. He needed me in action mode. That was the night that I had a plate shatter in the ceremony.
oh,
It
okay.
actually, so that one did attack both of us, and he was bleeding. I was burnt, and yeah, it
The
was
very next night.
very next night. It shattered into 1,000 pieces on us.
Wow.
And it was so that was a more malicious cord. That was a person who has very powerful dark energy, dark dense energy. And her cord was not very happy about being cut.
Wow.
So she burned hot, hot. Oh boy, did she burn hot. So that was a total, and that was a night where they needed me to move into action. They needed me to move because we actually had to shift halfway through and change it into a cauldron spell as well. And it was so powerful and beautiful. It was just completely different. It was just completely different. So,
So I mean, it's almost like your job is just to be ready. It's
yep.
just be open. Cause again, it's like you told me and like we talked about earlier, it's like you're not really the one, you're not like casting a spell that's making them do something. It's not this the
Mhm.
preacher gives you the power of God and shocks you and gives you the power of tongues. It's like you are inviting them to tap into their own power to cut ties with this cord energetically. And then you're there to be like, I'm here to try to keep this thing in a space that feels safe and productive and
Yes.
positively charged. And I got to be ready for whatever energy they bring in, whatever power they're unleashing in this space.
Bingo. And I keep it contained.
Yeah.
Energy is transferred, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
um, I mean, that sounds just so crazy, but like, if you're not careful, you can be irresponsible with this stuff, and energy can go to places it's not supposed to go. It can
Sure.
attach to things it's not supposed to attach to. So I am in facilitation, making sure that we dispose of this energy properly. So at the end of every ceremony, when I close the container, I always say, we are going to return this energy to Mother Earth, to Pachamama, and we are going to ask her to make this energy useful, to, turn it into soil and push it back up into, into a tree, into a person, whatever it may be. Make this energy useful. We don't want any of this attaching to anyone else unknowingly, and it can happen. So it's energy is a funny thing. It's, yes, we're cutting a cord, but there are still energies attached to those cords. Like there's, whether it's a belief system, again, like belief systems alone can be super detrimental. It's like, I don't want to be passing that type of energy on to someone who doesn't want to carry that. We all have narratives, we have contracts, we have all kinds of things that are attached to us that we never agreed to. And I'm
Yeah.
spending my life helping people disconnect from those things. So,
We talked a little bit about this. You sort of mentioned like that ceremony you did right after mine that was filled with a little bit of like some malevolent energy or some energy that was burning really hot, the plate breaking. When you're holding space and someone is going through a very psychospiritual experience, someone is permeating through space time, or like someone's dead relatives are coming through, or someone's like past selves are coming through. um what is the experience for you? I mean, like you said, you got into this, like you watched a TikTok on it and you're like, oh, let me research that and get into it. And then you did one for your husband. And like, as you've been, have there ever been times where you're like scared or uncomfortable? Like, uh-oh, I don't know if I can contain this. Or like, what is your experience? Or I mean, geez, do you ever get bored? Are you ever like, oh my
no.
God, I'm not in the mood today? Like, how has this been for you as the person who gets to be in the room for all of these different people going through a very deeply personal experience?
It's a great question. Um, hmm. Well, so I space out ceremonies. I'm very responsible with spacing them out because I know that they're really draining for me, and
Uh,
I want to be able to show up for somebody. So I'm careful about that. I'm never bored. This is never boring.
mhm.
Um, I love dancing in different dimensions. It's just a space that just feels really natural to me. Um, I have spent my entire life trying to figure out where I fit in this world. I've always been a little weird. I was a little quirky witch daughter who was adopted into a conservative Christian family who treated me with the most love and respect you could ever imagine. But I've always been a little bit off compared to what society standards will be, if you will.
Mhm.
Um, I have been through many careers. I've had to shift a lot in my life. And I feel like everything that I've done and everything that I have experienced up until this point has led me to this place where I get to show up as authentically as I've ever been able to. And I don't have to do anything other than just be myself. And so when I'm in these ceremonies and people, you know, getting to give a message to somebody from someone who's passed over is like one of the most beautiful experiences I think I've ever had in my life. To be able to like help someone see their value and like own it. Oh
Yeah.
God, like that's just like there's nothing better than this. Like it's not always easy. Sometimes, like I said, sometimes I'm like, okay, what do I do? How do I make sure I'm really showing up for this person? And I have to watch my own ego in that. I have to make sure that I'm not making this about me in the moment, which is it can happen. Like I can feel like, oh, am I doing enough? Am I being good enough? Because that's my ego, right? That's my ego needing to be valued and measured. And um, but I have to say, like, it's it, I feel exceptionally lucky to get to do this for people. And I didn't think this was going to be a thing that people like really wanted from me, but it is becoming very popular and people are coming to me a lot for it. And I feel like the luckiest person on the planet that people would trust me with such intimate moments in their life, ultimately.
I mean, like I said, I had no idea what you were talking about when you said, do you want to come do a cord cutting ceremony? But I just trust you. And I just said yes. There was something in me that was like, yeah, do that. I've often described, and I'm going to do a little bit of a testimonial for you here as a person who's gone through this. We've already been talking a little bit about the experience that we had together. And we've talked a little bit about things that you've experienced with other people and in this setting. What I wanted to cut ties with shame mostly, that I have a lot of shame through different phases of my life, from going all the way back to being a little kid, especially when it comes to my panic. I've talked on this show a lot about my panic disorder, about my fear. I talk a lot about my anxiety on my channel and on this podcast. And I've been trying to reframe my approach to my anxiety. I talked about on this podcast that for a while I was trying to get rid of my anxiety, get rid of my fear. That wasn't working. Had to realize, you can't do that. You can't get rid of fear. You can't get rid of discomfort. You can't get rid of pain or sorrow. Those are parts of life. That's part of that impermanence that we've been talking about. So I've had to have this reframe of like, okay, well, how do I reframe my relationship with my fear, with my anxiety? And I realized that I have a problem with feeling shame about it. That like, when it's not something I've ever chosen, it just sort of happens to me. And from the time I was a very young child all the way up until, being a 34-year-old man in the airport going to Ireland and crying as I'm getting on the plane, I feel deep shame and embarrassment about this fear that I don't control. And so I wanted to cut ties with that, and also just generally let myself off the hook for stuff. I talked about this at the beginning of the episode. I struggle with forgiveness and forgiving myself. Wanted to just kind of go through these different ages and let myself off the hook. You talked about seeing these boys very clearly. I saw them very clearly. I know my brother saw them clearly because he knew all these boys too. And they're all there with us in this circle, these different ages of like the little kids, the preteens, the teenager, the kid in his 20s. I've talked about on this show, and I've told people my whole life. I've told people my entire life. I've said, like, every time I've thought about quitting acting, quitting music, the stuff that I do, and doing something more practical, there has been something, a voice that I recognize that feels, I always call it my higher self, that always tells me, like, keep coming, a little bit further, you're not done yet, keep coming. And that's the thing that's kept me going. There's always been this thing that's sort of been pulling me through. And I've talked about on this show, in episodes where I discuss my sobriety, that at the time when I was first getting sober, living in New York, I talked about this on John DeLynne's podcast. Like, this is a story I've been telling for years. There was this voice that was coming to me late at night. I was at my most suicidal, my most depressed. I had suicidal ideation for years and years and years, but living in New York, moving to New York, getting my teeth kicked in day after day, it was the darkest it had ever been. And I was really considering that I wasn't going to make it out of New York alive. I was going up to the roof of my building regularly late at night and thinking maybe tonight's the night I jump off the roof. And this voice was coming in, this very clear voice. And I was really drunk and fucked up. And this really clear, sober voice would come in and pull me off the rooftop and say, like, back up, man. Like, you've been working really, really hard right now. And I'm so proud of you. And I love you so much. I need you to just go inside. And it would have me like look in the mirror. Like, it'd be like, when you go inside, I want you to look in the mirror so I can tell you I love you. And it was weird because I knew it was me. It was something inside of me, but it was a version of me that I didn't recognize. And it was like, I kept calling it my higher self. And I've told this story to so many people that, like, some part of me, my higher self, it didn't feel external. It didn't feel like a visitation from an angel or from God or from like an extra dimensional being or something. It was me, but it was a version of me I couldn't quite grasp, but I trusted it and I followed it. And I got off those rooftops. I got into recovery. I got sober. While we were in this cord cutting ceremony, talking to all these younger versions of myself, you and I both recognized that there was one guy who was not on board yet. And I was like, yeah, this guy's not sure. And you talked earlier about, we lit another candle for him. This is the version of me that was in New York. And you said, hey, talk to him, talk to this version and see if you can help him out. I started talking to him. And as I'm talking to him, I start recognizing the words that I'm saying to him as the words that the voice that used to come and talk to me on the rooftop said to me. And we're all collectively, the three of us, you, me, and my brother, are collectively realizing that, holy shit, it's me right now in this room talking to myself on the rooftop and getting me to come back. And it's me who's connected with all of these past versions of myself. It's like the Megazord version. We're all lining up and connected, and it's literally the movie Interstellar. Like, who put the wormhole there? There's a
Yes.
wormhole at the end of our
Oh,
galaxy that's pulling us through to a galaxy with habitable planets. Who put it there? And we find out at the end of the movie, spoiler alert, it was us. We put it there, and we pulled ourselves through time. It was one of the, and I'm gonna say this at the beginning of the episode for the people who listen to it, the audio version, that like, I need you to come into this with an open mind. People on YouTube, if you're watching this, it's just happening as you're watching it. But it sounds crazy, but it's I wasn't on anything. I didn't take anything. I didn't take any psychedelics. Stone
no.
cold sober, and we had this wild psycho-spiritual experience that was one of the most seminal spiritual experiences of my life. You had talked about before we even started the ceremony that like we might see that time isn't linear and stuff like that. Without going into like further detail, I think that's a sufficient testimonial to say like, we saw some shit, we did some shit, we healed some shit. It was wild. And I am just enormously grateful, forever grateful for you for offering that space and for holding that space the way that you did. It was
Thank you.
it was better than I ever could have hoped for it to be.
That was like one of the best moments of my life. Honestly, I think that like just stacks up in the top 3 best moments ever. First of all, because I love you, and I can't imagine what my life would be like if I didn't have my Austin in my life.
Well, I love you too.
And secondly, like, I sometimes it's hard to believe in our ability to move through these spaces without some type of lubrication, if you will. Something that like softens the secondary consciousness, allows us into our primary. And you were completely sober when this happened. And we haven't even talked about this yet, but I think you need to probably explore that you are a bit of a conduit of sorts. Like, you were able to create something there, and I was part of it, but you were creating it in which you were able to access different spaces and time and dimensions, if you will. And I mean, that's a gift. That's a spiritual gift right in of itself. And I remember when I was with you and I was doing this and I was standing on that rooftop with the old you.
Yeah.
And he looked at me and he goes, "Who are you?" And he like saw me and he was like, "Who are you?" And I was like, I don't even know how to begin to explain what's happening.
To explain what's going on right now.
But it was just such a beautiful moment, and I loved that I got to, because I'm newer to your life, so I didn't get to know all the Austins before. So I just loved watching all of you come together again.
Well, and we realized too that like he was like the hero of the story too. That we were like, he's the guy that like did the hard stuff so that this version of Austin could exist. But when I was that guy, even I thought I was going crazy at the time when I was standing on the rooftop and hearing voices and talking to myself. I was saying stuff like that. Like when you said, "Who are you?" When you told me that day, I was like, I was literally going, "Who the hell is talking to me right now?" And I was on the rooftop in New York going, what is happening? And there were so, and I probably looked at you and went, "Who are you? What the, and it was like that out loud. I was standing on a rooftop in Brooklyn at 4 a.m. going, "What the fuck is happening? Who's talking to me right now?" And thinking I was losing my mind. But there was like this really crystal clear voice that was like, "It's okay. It's okay. You're going to be okay. Follow me." And luckily I recognized that voice. Luckily he recognized the voice and trusted it. And I think that it was very useful that, like, again, couldn't have understood it until we were there. We talked about this with death. It's not a thing you can understand until you were there. Couldn't have really understood what was happening. Just that it was something to trust and something to move forward toward. Couldn't understand it until I was there in that room with you. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, okay. That's what was happening. I didn't expect in my lifetime that I would get an answer to what was happening.
I wouldn't either.
Yeah.
honestly, and I believe in some pretty wild stuff. So, and I want to like just manage everyone's expectations here. This was a humongous thing that happened, and I'm sure part of it is our energy together probably
Hmm.
created some really amazing like
You, me, and Adam.
vortexes. Yes,
Yeah,
I mean
you, me, and
Adam.
Adam, the Triforce of us. Yeah,
Yes, yes, exactly.
yeah,
So I can't guarantee that's what it's going to be like for people every time they sit, but at this point, like I am beyond like setting limitations to what can be because
yeah.
I have, I when I was a little girl, I used to mourn that magic wasn't real. I used to mourn that Narnia wasn't a place that I could get to through the wardrobe. And I spent my whole life looking for magic. I spent my whole life looking for a Peter Pan to come and take me to Neverland. I have always been mystical and magical by nature, and I believed in it. That's why it was so hard for me that it wasn't real. And now that I'm finally sitting into who I am as a person, I'm living in magic every single day.
Hmm.
Every day. And I've never liked being alive more. And
That's
this
so
is
awesome.
it's seriously like I love who I am, and I love that this isn't for everybody, but I love that people want to come and meet me in this space and they want to do these things and explore these opportunities because I don't think there is a greater cause in this world than to want to watch the world heal itself.
Yeah.
It's,
That,
you know?
that's beautiful. You are doing one of these tonight, and I gotta let you go and prepare for that. If people who are listening want to find you and want to do this with you and want you to be their facilitator, is there a way that they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. They can email me. So I have an email. It's thepathoftheplant@gmail.com. So they are welcome to email me and I will call and have a little consultation and make sure that I am the correct facilitator for you because I might not be everyone's cup of tea. So, and I'm okay with that.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I would love to open up my services to the rest of the world. So
The path of the plant at
the path of the
gmail.com. They
plant.
can get in touch with you if they want, even if they're not in Utah. I've had friends who I've told this story to who aren't in Utah who are like, I will go to Utah to do that with her.
And I will
So,
travel too. If I have enough people in a specific area, obviously it's going to be a little more expensive to do it that way, but I would gladly travel to do this. I believe in what I'm doing with every ounce of my being. So I'm kind of
I'm
curious to see where this trip goes at this point.
I'm so happy that you found this. It feels like it feels like ever since I've known you, you've been hunting for this. It's been I've seen you go through so many phases of like, geez, this was the thing I thought that I was supposed to do, and I don't know, that's not really materialized. And now I'm trying this, and it's so lovely to see you find this, and it's such a like a powerful version of you. So when you were saying like I've never enjoyed being alive more, I was like, and that you love who you are right now. I'm right there with you. I'm like, I love watching that for you. And I also feel the same way. I'm like, I've never felt more powerful. I've never loved who I am more. So thank you for doing this service for people and for yourself and for facilitating it for me. And thank you for joining me today to talk about it
Oh, yeah.
so openly.
Thank you for asking me. I honestly am honored and I'm thrilled that people want to know about it. Like, cool. You can do it. You can heal yourself. You want to heal yourself? Give me a call. Like, let's do this.
Hell yeah. Let's do this. I love you so much.
I love
And
you too.
thanks for doing this.
Oh, thank you. And hey, everybody, thanks for listening and thanks for supporting my brother because this guy has the biggest heart on the planet. So support this amazing guy.
That's nice. All right.
All
Okay.
right. Love
Talk to
you.
you later. Love you.